The police showed up at my door one afternoon with a shocking statement: my son was under arrest for ignoring a fine from our HOA. All of this chaos started because a certain entitled HOA Karen decided to call 911 a broken bar over a basketball hoop. She had money, lawyers, and political friends. We were just a working-class family trying to get by, or so she thought. What she didn't realize was that my quiet, unassuming wife carried a secret that would flip the situation completely in our favor. By the time she figured out who she was really up against, the damage was already done. I've learned something about wealthy people over the years. They think intimidation works on everyone until they target the wrong family. I'm David Mitchell, and what happened to us over one simple basketball hoop turned into the most satisfying revenge you could imagine. By the end of this, you'll understand why it's never wise to underestimate someone in a broken bar, especially if they're married to a person with real power. My wife, Betty, and I had scraped together every cent to move our 17-year-old son, Lucas, into this upscale neighborhood. I worked from home as a freelance web developer, which sounds fancy until you realize it often involves wearing pajamas all day while wrestling with stubborn code. Betty called herself a government paperwork consultant. It always sounded a little vague, but it paid the bills. Lucas was our pride, an exceptional basketball player, honor roll student, and already on the radar of college scouts offering scholarships that could change our family's future. The neighborhood was exactly what we had dreamed of, even if it meant stretching our budget to the breaking point. Manicured lawns, shiny luxury cars, and neighbors who likely spent more on spa treatments each month than we did on groceries. We tightened our belts and made it work, because Lucas deserved the best chance we could give him. The house came with a nice driveway, perfect for the portable basketball hoop Lucas's grandfather had given him. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, movable hoop, but it meant the world to him. That's when we met Amanda Blackwood. Imagine the ultimate cliché tilde copyright of a wealthy, overbearing neighborhood busybody. Now multiply that by 10 and add a touch of desperation. Amanda owned the largest home on the block, drove a car worth more than our yearly income, and carried herself as though the word no had never applied to her. As an HOA board member, she had just enough power to make people's lives miserable. The trouble began when Lucas accidentally left his basketball hoop in the driveway overnight. Apparently, the HOA rules, buried somewhere in the 40-page manual I never bothered to read, stated that all equipment must be stored after 8 p.m. The next morning, a formal notice appeared on our door, complete with a $200 fine and a condescending tone. The letter included phrases like, "Certain families need to follow community standards and maintaining property values for appropriate residents." Thinking we could resolve things neighbor to neighbor, I walked over to Amanda's house to explain. She answered the door in a silk robe that probably cost more than my car payment, gave me a once-over like I was an inconvenience, and listened with the kind of fake smile that doesn't reach the eyes. When I finished, she said, "Rules are rules. If you can't follow them, maybe you'd be happier somewhere that fits your lifestyle better." When I told Betty about the encounter, I expected anger or at least concern. Instead, she stayed calm and advised me to document everything, keep copies of all letters, save every detail, and let Amanda keep digging herself deeper. When I asked why she wasn't more worried about the $200 we didn't have, she simply smiled and said she dealt with bullies before. There was a confidence in her voice I hadn't heard before, as though she knew something I didn't. Over the next few days, Amanda's hostility escalated. More notices, bigger fines, and even daily property inspections. The amounts were quickly adding up to something we could never pay, and I was starting to fear we might lose our home before Lucas could graduate. What I didn't know yet was that Amanda had her own financial problems. She was 45 days from foreclosure due to failed investments and was trying to force families like ours to sell below market value so she could buy cheap, renovate, and resell for profit. Through it all, Betty seemed oddly knowledgeable about legal procedures, a certified mail, harassment laws, documentation standards, far beyond what her paperwork consulting job suggested. I later learned that Amanda had made a crucial mistake. She never researched Betty's full background. She assumed government paperwork consultant meant low-level clerical work, not realizing who she was truly dealing with. Meanwhile, Lucas's senior year, which should have been the best time of his life, was turning into a nightmare. College scouts were asking questions about neighborhood disputes, and Lucas started hesitating before getting his basketball out, as if he expected trouble every time. Our home was supposed to be his safe place to chase his dreams, but Amanda was determined to make it anything but. Whenever I shared my worries with Betty, she would just give me that same unreadable smile. One evening, I finally asked why she looked like she was plotting something. Her answer sent a chill down my spine. Amanda has no idea what she just started. From that point on, things escalated beyond anything I thought possible over a basketball hoop. This wasn't simple pettiness anymore. Amanda had launched a full-blown campaign to push us out. Every single day brought new accusations, higher fines, and fresh reminders that she didn't think we belonged in her neighborhood. The penalties jumped from $50 to $200, then an outrageous $500, and I swear she was inventing the violations as she went. Lucas got written up for excessive noise at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just for dribbling his ball, and unauthorized gatherings because two friends came over to work on homework. It was crystal clear this wasn't about HOA rules. She was building a meticulous case against us, documenting everything with unnerving precision. I caught her more than once taking photos of our house from different angles, jotting down dates and times like she was running some sort of covert surveillance. She even started enlisting other neighbors, pulling them aside during evening walks, whispering, and gesturing toward our home. Soon, complaints started appearing from people I didn't even know. Susan Walsh, a nurse who lived 2 doors down, eventually pulled me aside and told me what Amanda was really up to. She'd been prying into our finances and work history, promising other struggling residents they could benefit if they helped her clean up the neighborhood. The way Susan described it, Amanda was trying to rally people into her personal property purge. I was furious, ready to confront Amanda directly, but every time I brought it up, Betty would calmly talk me down. She'd sip her coffee like nothing was happening and remind me, "I've dealt with bullies before. I know exactly how to handle people who think they can push others around without consequence." It drove me crazy. She seemed to be playing some long game, 3 moves ahead of whatever Amanda was planning. When I asked why we were just sitting back while the fines piled up, Betty would say, "Patience. Let her make more mistakes before we respond." It felt like the worst strategy imaginable when we were bleeding money. Even stranger was how much Betty suddenly seemed to know about legal maneuvering. She told me to send certified letters, use registered mail, date and timestamp everything, and never respond verbally unless it was recorded. I couldn't help asking where she'd picked up all this legal know-how. She'd shrug it off, saying government paperwork consulting involved plenty of regulation knowledge and difficult bureaucrats, but her detailed talk about harassment law and civil rights protections sounded like something straight from a lawyer's office. Meanwhile, Amanda was only becoming more relentless. Susan later told me she'd overheard Amanda boasting about her connections and ability to make problems disappear for the right families, while making life hell for the wrong ones. I suspected money trouble was driving her obsession. She poured hours each day into tracking our movements, organizing complaints, and building what looked like a full legal file against us. The tension in the neighborhood was thick. Some people quietly sided with us but stayed out of it to avoid becoming Amanda's next target. Others avoided us altogether, too afraid to get involved. On community message boards, debates flared about whether HOA enforcement had gone too far. The part that hurt the most was watching this take a toll on Lucas. He tried to stay upbeat, focusing on basketball and schoolwork, but I could see the strain. College scouts began asking about the neighborhood issues, and I worried Amanda's vendetta might wreck his scholarship chances. He'd look around nervously before taking his basketball out, bracing for another complaint. As the neighborhood split into quiet factions, online discussions about Amanda's overreach kept growing. People were beginning to see through her, though she seemed too focused on her mission to realize her support was slipping. Then, one evening, I overheard Betty on yet another cryptic phone call. These calls had become more frequent, but this time I caught words that didn't fit her consulting work at all. Talk of accelerating timelines, federal guidelines, and something called Phase 2. When she hung up, I confronted her. Who exactly are you talking to? And what does timeline acceleration have to do with Amanda? Betty gave me that same confident look she'd been wearing for weeks. But this time, I caught a flicker of something else, like she was holding back a truth that could change everything. The moment I caught sight of her laptop screen, my stomach tightened. She quickly closed the windows, but not before I saw the header. Confidential County Investigation, A complete with official government formatting. My pulse kicked up. This was no ordinary paperwork consulting. Betty, I whispered, my voice barely carrying, what's really going on? Federal guidelines? Accelerated timelines? She simply gave me that same unreadable smile and said, you'll know soon enough. And just like that, I was left wondering who exactly I had married and what kind of authority she might secretly wield. The following week, things took a turn for the outright insane. Amanda must have decided that endless harassment wasn't moving fast enough, so she escalated calling in the police. In hindsight, I should have expected it. Her complaints weren't breaking us, and I now know she was running out of time for whatever financial mess she was trying to fix. But at the time, I thought she was just unraveling over a basketball hoop. I had no idea how far she'd go. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Lucas was in the driveway practicing with two of his basketball teammates, all of them honor roll kids with college scouts watching their every move. They'd been hanging out at our place for months without incident. That day, Amanda came marching across the street, phone held high like she was filming an expose copyright. She started barking at these teenagers with comments that made my blood boil. You people need to learn respect, and this used to be a decent neighborhood. Lucas, ever the peacemaker, stayed polite. His friends followed his lead, refusing to give her any kind of reaction she could twist against them. When she failed to provoke them, she stepped back, dialed her phone, and began an animated conversation filled with hand gestures toward our house, from the kitchen window. I didn't realize at first that she was calling 911 or that she was telling the dispatcher there were armed, drug-dealing teenagers in our driveway, and that the ringleader needed to be arrested on the spot. She painted a picture of a gang war, a broken bar, when in reality, the crime scene was just a few kids shooting hoops and finishing math homework. Because she mentioned weapons and drugs, emergency responders had to take it seriously. 20 minutes later, 2 police cruisers arrived with lights flashing. My stomach dropped. Officers Smith and White stepped out with body cameras already recording, treating it like an active threat. Neighbors poured into the street to watch. I was panicking about what this might do to Lucas's reputation and scholarship chances. Then something unexpected happened. Betty came out of the house and Officer Smith's entire demeanor shifted. "Ma'am," he said, "don't I know you from the county office building?" The tone was unmistakably respectful, like he was speaking to someone he'd worked alongside before. Betty gave a casual answer about attending county meetings for her consulting work, but the way both officers treated her from that point on was completely different. She began asking for incident report numbers, speaking in precise legal terms, and showing a familiarity with police protocol that I'd never seen. It was clear she knew exactly what she was doing. The officers carefully documented Amanda's accusations, spoke to every witness, and determined this was a civil dispute and not a criminal matter. Amanda, on the other hand, was unraveling. She kept insisting the teenagers were dangerous and needed to be arrested, but the officers weren't buying it. When pressed for details about the supposed weapons and drug activity, she started tripping over her own story, contradicting herself, and making it obvious she had fabricated the whole thing. Her desperation was palpable. She began threatening to call her lawyer and go to the media if the police didn't act. Betty remained calm and professional through it all, asking the right questions and ensuring everything was properly recorded. When I later asked how she knew so much about law enforcement procedure, she claimed it was part of safety training for her government work. But the way Officer Smith kept looking at her made me think there was a history there, one she wasn't ready to share. By the end of nearly an hour of interviews, it was clear Amanda's big move had backfired. The officers wrapped things up with a clear warning to Amanda: filing false emergency reports wasn't just bad behavior, it was a criminal offense that could land her in serious trouble. They let her know they'd be submitting a detailed account of the incident, including her shifting statements and the fact there was zero evidence to support her accusations. Amanda didn't take it well. She started spouting threats about taking this higher and hinted at political connections that could make problems for everyone. But beneath the bluster, I could tell she knew this had blown up in her face. Her grand plan had just backfired, and badly. That night, once the squad cars were gone and the neighborhood had retreated indoors to gossip, I checked the local message boards. For the first time, the tide had clearly turned in our favor. People were openly questioning Amanda's motives, calling out her aggressiveness, and poking holes in her complaints. Her standing in the community was starting to crack. I was just beginning to think maybe we could finally breathe when I overheard Betty on yet another one of her cryptic calls. This time, she mentioned federal guidelines and something called Phase 2. When she caught me listening, she ended the call, turned to me, and calmly said, "Yes, I understand the federal guidelines. We'll proceed with Phase 2. The words sent a cold shiver through me. Federal? What federal guidelines, Betty? But before I could get an answer, Amanda's next move arrived, and it was even more unhinged than before. After her police stunt collapsed in front of the entire neighborhood, she decided to escalate to the legal system. She filed for an emergency restraining order, slapped us with a civil lawsuit, and came at us with every accusation she could think of: intimidation, property damage, community safety threats. She'd hired an expensive lawyer, no doubt burning through her last available credit. I stood there reading the legal papers, my head spinning from the sheer absurdity of the claims, and the crushing realization that we were up against someone with far deeper pockets than we had. I paced the living room, muttering to Betty that there was no way we could afford a lawyer like hers. I pictured us being flattened by a high-powered legal team while we fumbled through self-representation with nothing but internet printouts in hope. Betty, however, wasn't panicking. She sat at the table with the court documents, flipping through them with the same focus she might give a recipe card. "Don't worry," she said. "I can handle this." I stared at her in disbelief. "Handle this? We could lose the house. Lucas's future could be wrecked." That's when she got up, disappeared into the bedroom, and came back carrying a box I'd never seen before. From inside, she pulled an official state university law degree A with her name on it. I was speechless. "My wife was a lawyer?" "I never told you," she explained, "because I wanted a normal marriage, not to be the A lawyer wife who's expected to fix everything." Suddenly, all those mysterious bits of legal knowledge made sense. As it turned out, she'd used her law degree extensively in her government consulting career, working on regulatory compliance and civil rights issues, the very skills we needed to fight Amanda's attack. She dove into Amanda's filing with surgical precision, immediately spotting procedural flaws, missing documentation, and weak arguments. "Her lawyer rushed this," Betty said, pointing to conflicting dates and unsupported claims. "They've made mistakes we can use." And Amanda, in true Amanda fashion, had failed to do her homework again. She'd only ever dug up Betty's basic business license, never thinking to check government directories, professional records, or even her maiden name. Her attorney, too focused on intimidation, hadn't run a proper background check. Meanwhile, the stress on Lucas was building. College recruiters started postponing visits, not wanting to get caught up in a family embroiled in a lawsuit. His performance on the court and in the classroom was slipping under the weight of it all. This was supposed to be his year to shine. Instead, he was worrying about whether we'd even have a home by graduation. Betty spent the next several days preparing our legal response with the kind of disciplined thoroughness that made me realize this wasn't the first time she'd dealt with a fight like this, even if she'd never told me about it. Betty spent the days before court in full battle mode, organizing evidence, cross-referencing timelines, and crafting arguments that went far beyond neighborly disagreements. She'd uncovered financial records and property assessments that exposed Amanda's true game, targeting families she thought she could bully out, scooping up their homes for cheap, and flipping them for profit. "This isn't about a basketball hoop," Betty told me one night, spreading documents across the dining table like pieces on a chessboard. "It's about money." She's desperate, and she thinks we're easy prey. The court date was set for the following week, and Betty's confidence was starting to rub off on me. She's about to find out what real legal experience looks like. she said with a smile that was equal parts reassurance and a broken bar something else. That's when I went to get the mail and found an official government envelope addressed not to Betty Mitchell, but to S. Williams. My stomach tightened. When I asked her about it, she just brushed it off, but the mystery deepened. How many layers did my wife actually have? The morning of the hearing, I was a wreck. I'd never set foot in a courthouse for anything like this before, but when Betty emerged from our bedroom in a sharp, tailored suit I'd never seen, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that definitely wasn't from our usual bargain store, I realized this was her world, not mine. She looked like she belonged there. The courthouse was buzzing, half the neighborhood crammed into the back rows like it was a live episode of their favorite drama. Amanda sat with her attorney, draped in expensive jewelry, whispering like they were plotting a siege. But what caught my attention most was how the courthouse staff greeted Betty with nods and familiarity, as if they'd worked together before. When our case was called, Betty rose and introduced herself to the judge in a tone that made my jaw slacken. Your Honor, I'm Betty Williams, representing the Mitchell family in this civil rights matter. The Judge Harris actually smiled. Miss Williams, your materials are very thorough and well prepared. It didn't sound like a polite platitude, it sounded like recognition. Then came Amanda's turn. Her lawyer launched into a melodramatic speech about community safety and property values that might have worked in a gossip circle but fell apart in a courtroom. They displayed photographs of Lucas's basketball hoop as if it were contraband, and argued about noise violations without a single legitimate decibel reading or timestamp to back them up. The highlight, if you could call it that, came when Amanda took the stand. She tried to justify her 911 call, spinning tales of weapons and drugs that didn't exist. Under questioning, she stumbled, contradicted herself, and dug her own credibility grave. I could see Judge Harris's patience thinning by the minute. And then Betty took over. She dismantled Amanda's claims point by point, introducing legally obtained recordings of Amanda making discriminatory remarks, calling in Susan Walsh to testify about Amanda's whispered promises to certain neighbors and invasive questions about our finances. Piece by piece, she built an airtight picture of harassment fueled by financial desperation, not civic duty. The knockout punch, a neatly organized set of documents detailing Amanda's failed investments and looming foreclosure, connecting the dots between her money problems and her aggressive push to force certain families out. Betty's command of the law was a revelation, citing precedents, navigating procedural nuances, and explaining civil rights protections like she'd been born doing it. Amanda's high-priced attorney suddenly looked like he'd wandered into the wrong courtroom. By the time Betty finished, Amanda's face was ghost white and her lawyer was shuffling papers like maybe, just maybe, they should have done their homework. Judge Harris didn't take long to deliver the verdict. Judge Harris didn't waste words. She tossed Amanda's restraining order with prejudice, which, as Betty explained later, meant Amanda could never try the same stunt again. On top of that, Harris slapped Amanda with sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit and warned her that another stunt like her false 911 call could land her in criminal court, complete with fines that would make her think twice before picking up the phone. Amanda's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Amanda herself was on the verge of tears, and me, I was fighting the urge to fist pump in the middle of the courtroom. Walking out of there felt like the biggest win of my life, but also like I just stepped into an even bigger mystery about my wife. Neighbors who'd shown up to watch kept sneaking glances at Betty, whispering things like they'd just witnessed a secret weapon they never knew existed. Amanda, meanwhile, was unraveling in the parking lot, muttering about appeals and higher authorities, her confidence in shambles. That night, still riding the high, I ducked into Betty's home office to check emails and froze. Her computer was open, and on the screen was a document stamped County Manager Ray Confidential Briefing in official government formatting. This wasn't paperwork consulting. My heart was pounding before I even knew why. Amanda's spiral went public fast. She started flooding every neighborhood forum with furious, unhinged rants about corruption, biased judges, and rule-breaking families destroying property values. It was like watching a slow-motion implosion, fascinating and pathetic at the same time. Neighbors who'd once tolerated her were openly rolling their eyes. But she wasn't done making bad decisions. 2 days after our courtroom win, Amanda marched into the city police station demanding to see Chief Anderson. She was convinced that if she took it to the top, someone would see her as the brave truth-teller exposing our supposedly criminal family. She had no idea Betty already had a meeting scheduled with Chief Anderson that same afternoon. When I asked why she needed to meet the police chief and what consulting work required that kind of access, she just smiled, that same mysterious smile I'd been seeing for months. "You'll understand soon," she said, grabbing a stack of official-looking blinders and heading out a broken bar in a car I now realized had government plates. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was rallying hard around us. Susan organized a petition that pulled in over 200 signatures, and people began showing up at our door to share their own stories of Amanda's harassment. The local news caught wind, and every segment made Amanda look more like a vindictive busybody while casting us as a family standing up to targeted abuse. For the first time in months, Lucas was himself again, shooting hoops without scanning the street for Amanda, focusing on his grades, and looking ahead to college. Recruiters were back on the schedule, his game was improving, and the tension in his shoulders was finally gone. Online, the tide had completely turned. Neighbors were posting their own run-ins with Amanda, and I learned we weren't her first victims, just the first to push back hard enough to win. And thanks to Betty, we hadn't just pushed back a broken bar, we'd broken her grip on the neighborhood. The more stories poured in from neighbors, the clearer the picture became. Amanda hadn't just been a nosy busybody, she'd been running a calculated campaign to control who lived here. It was all about profit, not community standards. Our court win hadn't just saved us, it had probably stopped her from doing this to other families. That same afternoon, Amanda was at the police station, ranting to Chief Anderson about corruption and justice. Betty, meanwhile, was in her mysterious meeting with him. At the meeting she told me would explain everything. Around 6 p.m., Susan called. Her voice was breathless. She'd been at the station earlier and had witnessed the confrontation firsthand. Amanda's rant had turned into a full-blown shouting match, drawing multiple officers. Then the chief's office door opened and in walked Betty. By the time I heard Betty's car in the driveway, I was replaying Susan's words over and over. My wife stepped inside, looking composed, but there was a flicker of something else, the look of someone who had just finished a major piece of business. When she set her briefcase down, I saw it. An official badge clipped to the side, stamped in bold letters, County Manager. The pieces clicked all at once. Later, Betty told me exactly how it went down. Amanda was mid-tirade when the door opened. In walked the housewife she'd been harassing for months, now wearing a sharp professional suit and an unmistakable badge. Chief Anderson stood. "Williams, thank you for addressing this personally," he said with genuine respect. Amanda blinked. "The broken bar, who are you? Why is he standing?" Betty didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I'm Betty Williams, County Manager. Chief Anderson reports to county government, which means he reports to me, and I'm also the mother of the boy you've been harassing for 6 months. Amanda's jaw dropped. "That's impossible. You're just a housewife." Betty's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That was your first and biggest mistake, Amanda." Game over. Turns out Betty had been quietly documenting every false 911 call, every discriminatory remark, and every harassment attempt for months, not just as a protective mom, but as a government official building a civil rights case. The result: civil rights charges filed through the proper channels, criminal charges for repeated false emergency calls, financial penalties so steep they triggered the foreclosure Amanda had been desperately trying to avoid, a restraining order enforced by the same law enforcement she'd been trying to weaponize against us. Socially, she was finished. Neighbors who'd once entertained her gossip now avoided her entirely. Within a month, she sold her home at a massive loss and fled the state. Our family, stronger than ever. Lucas's scholarship offers came flooding back. K3 schools, full rides. The neighborhood implemented new anti-harassment measures. Property values actually rose. 6 months later, Lucas was thriving at college. Betty was recognized professionally for her handling of the case, and me, I was grilling burgers at a block party where kids shot hoops in our driveway at the same hoop Amanda had tried to make a crime scene. Looking back, I learned one thing: never underestimate the quiet ones. My wife doesn't just work for the government. She is the government and the kind that protects families from bullies with both the law and the truth. Sometimes justice doesn't just win, it wins in style.